Hello, my name is Dorel Yosef. I'll be moderating this session, Global Gas and LNG. Let's get started. Challenging as it may be, I'll attempt to present a global and regional view on natural gas and LNG as a precursor to our panel discussions. The global long-term fundamentals will be driven by population and economic growth, electricity demand, and urbanization. With this growth, the energy demand is likely to increase by 37% by 2030, with the non-OECD countries leading the way. In the Middle East, the energy intensity picture is mixed, with UAE and Saudi Arabia performing not as strongly as the world's trend. This is, however, typical to this stage in the development of GCC states. But energy efficiency is not the only factor in determining a nation's energy intensity. Structural changes in an economy can increase or decrease energy intensity. So can changes in people's behavior. Improved energy productivity will help reducing emissions, and we see GCC on a path of energy intensity improvement post-2018. Natural gas will be the fastest growing major energy source and is projected to overtake coal by 2030, but more than $11 trillion is required along the supply chain to meet the long-term demand. By 2030, LNG will become the dominant form of trading gas with a share of about 15% of total gas consumptions. The energy markets are in continuous state of flux and continuous change is expected. It is why we are generally so wrong in predicting accurate long-term trends. A number of key uncertainties on both the supply and the demand side will dictate the global gas balance. These uncertainties are the individual countries' GDP, Asian LNG demand, geopolitical realities, government policies and carbon emissions, and China's development pattern. Global gas and LNG market will remain buoyant in short and long term. In Japan, more than 29 MTPA of legacy contracts rolling off by 2020, new likely nuclear restarts, and US LNG likely to materialize. I believe Japan's appetite for more long-term LNG contracts in the near future will be limited. Europe could also revisit the possibility of developing its considerable unconventional gas reserve to ease the dependency of importing gas, which will reach around 80% by 2030. A stronger pan-European cooperation is required with better electricity interconnectors and new pricing strategies. From a supply perspective, conventional production is expected to decline 1% per annum, while Europe and Russia remain joined at the hip in the supply-demand balance. However, by 2030, we expect that 30% of gas production in Europe will come from Norwegian fields currently under development or in discovery. In China, the gas demand increased by less than 4% last year, well below the pace of GDP. The target of producing 58% of gas domestically by 2040 is challenging without progress in developing its unconventional gas reserve resources, estimated at over 1,000 TCF. If significant progress in the unconventional gas development is made in China, this will have a disruptive effect on both regional and global energy markets. Australia simply needs to be more competitive in terms of both labor and capital productivity. In terms of greenfield projects, I believe that developing projects at a cost of over $3 billion per MTPA is not economic, will not meet the economics of the future. At the current multi-factor productivity levels in Australia, even on the brownfield front, there will be a number of expansions that will be deemed uneconomical. Let's look now at some regional considerations. Though the Middle East currently holds 43% of global gas reserves, it has only been accountable for 16% of total trade flow. Natural gas will be the fastest growing fossil fuel in terms of both production and consumption, and consequently, gas's share of primary energy demand will expand. Despite the discomfort of paying global market prices for a natural resource until recently considered available, the GCC, Qatar accepted, is becoming a gas importing region. Let us take, for instance, UAE. While the UAE produced around 54 BCM last year, it actually needed 66 BCM for its consumption. Of this, 50% was to meet domestic energy demand, 40% to facilitate oil extraction, and 10% for LNG exports. And so, the UAE has a gas shortfall of around 12 BCM and expected to rise. Post-2017, however, the gas deficit is expected to ease as first of the 4 planned nuclear power stations will enter the operational phase. If the 4-reactor 5.4 gigawatts project materializes in time and schedule, this could provide up to 25% of electricity demand in the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is taking steps on all fronts, including nuclear and renewable. Dubai's target is to have around 30% of power from clean sources by 2030, and according to the National Agenda 2021, the country's dependency on natural gas will decrease from 99% today to 76% or even 70%. In progressing toward a less carbon-intensive economy, fiscal stability and current account balances are important factors in deciding the next level of investment. The IMF predicts that under the current oil price environment, export revenues in the GCC could fall by almost $300 billion, which is significant. Therefore, some degree of fiscal reforms and adjustments are required. Various sources predict that overall in 2015, the GCC fiscal balance was in a deficit of around 13% of GDP. In Saudi Arabia alone, the 2015 budget deficit was, as we know, 15% of GDP, while the total revenue fell by 41% compared to the previous year. And pre-tax subsidies way high. In the UAE, energy subsidies in 2015 were estimated at 12.6 billion, which is around 3% of country's GDP or 9% of overall government expenditures. As you can see in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, these levels are higher. We see, however, positive developments across the region, more specifically in Saudi Arabia and UAE. KSA National Plan 2020 will introduce specific numeric targets to cap fiscal spending and debt accumulation, while UAE leads the region in cutting energy subsidies, a process that was started last year. Reforms in taxation could also help the GCC country improve revenue collections from the non-oil economy and partly offset the decrease in oil revenues. The government wealth varies across GCC, and consequently stronger case for cutting subsidies can be made for Oman and Bahrain, in particular because of the compounded effect of oil depletion, leaving them exposed to fiscal changes in the medium term that may affect their respective countries' rating. In terms of emissions per capita, GCC has one of the highest levels of primary energy consumption and emissions in the world. However, emissions will rise more slowly than primary energy as oil share of energy falls 6% by 2030 in the detriment of natural gas. The carbon intensity of natural gas-based power is approximately 50 to 60% lower than that of coal-based power, while crude and other petroleum products have a much higher carbon intensity. Natural gas will continue to be a low carbon intensity source and should be viewed as a transitional fuel toward more carbon efficient sources. In the UAE, the National Agenda 2021 targets 24% energy from clean sources. Natural gas, which will become the second most widely used source of energy by 2025, should be an essential part of the energy mix of each country. It is a transitioning fuel as well as a backup source of energy. In the process of electricity generation, natural gas emits 50% less CO2 than coal and is the cleanest of all fossil fuels. GCC's increasing dependency on natural gas will need to be addressed by a combination of instruments available today, but also steps should be taken to lay the foundation for swift implementation of future technologies in the area of exploration and production. In the process of transitioning to a cleaner energy mix, investments need to be allocated to projects that build up human capital, provide public goods, and foster creativity and innovation. Around the world, governments should do more to understand and explain environmental impacts of unconventional gas, whether onshore or offshore, facilitate and pass legislation that is conducive to increasing capital productivity, and refrain from using energy, in particular natural gas, for geopolitical purposes. I would like now to invite our distinguished panel to take these discussions further. So our panel consists of Ms. Patricia Roberts, Director, LNG Worldwide Limited, Mr. Phil Hunter, Senior Vice President with KBR, and Mr. Khaled Abubakar, Chairman, Taku Arabia. We have no questions from the audience, which is always good, because we can answer the questions that we know how to answer, right? Yes, I would like to put a question to the panel. Let's look at medium and long-term supply and demand worldwide, how that looks like in the next, let's say, 4 to 5 years. We see major discrepancies in the media, in the data, that say that we're going to have a period of the next 2, 3, 4 years of oversupply, 20, 30 BCM. I personally believe it's much higher. And after that, the market will come into balance. I also believe that it will not. I believe it will be an oversupply. So let's look most importantly at LNG, how this pans out. Let's talk about supply first, and then we'll talk about demand.
Okay.
Patricia?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. So Patricia Roberts from LNG Worldwide. And yeah, I think my sort of passion is following the LNG global business continuously. And we are in a state of complete growth. We will double the size of the industry between 2010 and 2020. And all of the money to fund that has all come from private sources. And we are in a stage now of very, very rapid growth from projects in Australia and projects in the United States. And it's interesting, Dorel, that those two countries don't have so many geopolitical levers, in a sense, that it's all a sort of free market economy and sort of private investment without national oil companies. But having such a confluence of growth has really depended on certain key criteria, like China and Asia growing in particular. And this confluence of a massive increase in supply is finding itself at a time when China is actually backing off of demand. So I agree with you, we will see some relative oversupply. But all LNG will be placed. There's enough markets for LNG to be placed worldwide. Nothing is going to become distressed. It's just that the price is going to continue to be discounted in order to place all of that gas into market. So supply and demand are currently just growing a lot. Demand is not growing as fast as supply. We do have an oversupply, and it is going to be a period of intense change in the LNG industry.
There is actually demand destruction in Europe is been going on for years as well. So, Phil, if we look at United States, for instance, what do you think would be is everything what's happening there on the LNG front economical? Can they place their cargoes in Asia that easily? Because the price is quite competitive. The Henry Hub is amended by a 115% premium. When you add up the liquefaction and transportation, it's almost like buying gas from Australia. So what's your view on the supply?
I don't know, is my microphone on?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm Phil Hunter. I'm Senior Vice President for LNG Development and Technology for KBR. My view on it is that I think there's been a period of probably over-optimism in the LNG business. I think, as Pat has said and Doral, that I think the markets have shifted tremendously to the negative side, if you like, for prospective LNG developments. I think in the US it's almost a reverse. If you remember, probably 10 years ago, we had the map of the US with all of the import terminals, I think 50 odd or 60 odd, I forget the number, because the US was running out of gas. And if you look at the same map now, I don't think it's as many, but I think there are a large number of prospective developments in the US for LNG export, for gas exports. Unfortunately, the markets have changed. Oil has done what it has, and LNG has, to some extent, followed suit. I don't think the oil has been the only driver. I think some of the growth in China especially, but in other places such as Japan, the restarts of the nuclear, etc., and even Korea, Taiwan. If you look year on year, there's been a reduction of LNG imports. And this all put together is probably skewed the picture in the US to the point of, and this is my opinion, that the facilities that are being built now and will take probably FID this year, will continue. They will go to market. The price or the cost is already committed. They will go to market. But what it means for the LNG market is it exacerbates the oversupply into the market. And depends who you listen to, which side of the argument you listen to. The level of oversupply, I think, I'm like Doral, I think it's going to be a lot greater than what we're hearing. The 20 to 30 million tons in oversupply, I think, is more likely to be in the 80 to 100 million tons per annum. And just to put that in perspective from my side of the business, that represents, if you look at an average LNG train today of about 5 million tons per annum, that's something like 15 to 16 LNG trains. So why, if you're looking for future developments, and these things are coming on between now and, say, 2022, why on earth would you commit to develop anything prior to that, knowing that there's already going to be an oversupply into the market?
These numbers are staggering. So 100 MTPA is for Australia, the current capacity. It's just, or more than what Qatar exports in LNG at the moment. So does that mean that there will be plenty of LNG going around for the Middle East? So if, for instance, we have this massive discovery in Egypt, Mr. Khaled, where do you think that gas will go? Will it go back into the region? Will it go into Europe? Will it be developed that easily first?
Thank you very much. I'm Khaled Abakr, the chairman of TAQA, and I'm on the board of the executive committee of the International Gas Union and a regional coordinator for its Africa and Middle East activities. So we look to the gas business from that angle on the development on Egypt, Africa, and Middle East. With all my respect to the different numbers and curves that we've seen, and I'm quite sure that everybody in this room are quite aware of the trend and the crash on the oil price, but there is an edge in the natural gas in general and specifically on the LNG, which is the impact of the technology development on that sector that make this commodity so flexible and easy to reach and reaching remote areas. If you look nowadays to the small-scale LNGs, if we look to the amount of FSRUs and countries that have developed FSRUs as a receiving terminal over the last 4 or 5 years, it's incredible. Our industry is becoming so dynamic to serve a better quality of life. Having said so, if we look to Egypt, Egypt has been a large producer of the gas, but with the growing economy, there are sustainable pressure on the growth of the demand of the gas. So the gas demand are increasing at 8% annually in Egypt, mainly feeding the power, then the industry. Egypt was producing up at a certain time 60 billion cubic meter per year. It went down to 43 billion cubic meter per year. So it turned from an exporting country to last year start to be an importing country using LNG. But again, with this major discovery of Zohar in the deep water of the Mediterranean, in addition to the regional discovery on the East Mediterranean, that present a decent reserve platform that can turn this part of the world to a regional hub. So you cannot neglect being, when you become a regional hub, you cannot neglect that, again, you depend largely on the gas industry to fuel your economy. But Egypt, although it has very clearly over the last 2 years directed itself to a mix of energy that include coal, mainly renewable energy and potentially nuclear, but still the gas will be a main and a major element of its economy and fueling its economical growth.
Okay, switching a bit to the demand side, I would like to talk a bit about China, because obviously China is slowing down, but whether it's 6.9% growth or 6.5% growth, that's a major growth that we talk about, almost 6 times the EU 27 growth. So China is still growing, but not as growing as much as we wanted to grow. And there is a clear disconnect in China between the GDP, unlike in Europe, for instance, between the GDP and the primary energy consumption. So we believe that China will need around 450, 500 BCM by 2040. They also have vast unconventional gas resources. I just want to fast forward in 5 years from now with all the advances in technology, with the ingenuity of the people, if they can tap in their unconventional gas resources, we're most likely going to see an immense glut on the market in terms of gas. Do you agree with that? And what do you think? So you'll have an oil glut that will, in my opinion, go for the next 5 years, if not more. And then on top of that, you may have a gas glut and China becoming a bit more self-sustainable.
I think the first thing to say about China is it's a centrally controlled and a centrally managed economy. So there are policies, there are 5-year policies which are set out. And as you quite rightly said, the gas use in China is more complicated than just linked to GDP. And it's partly because primarily in China, power generation is fueled by coal. And that is intended to remain the case. And the coal will be cleaned up. There will be fuel gas desulfurization and a lot of technology applied to cleaning up coal. But the gas is sort of more used for industrial, commercial use. And that sector of the market, is slowing down with the development of China as a more mature economy. The other thing that's really important is that China has a decision that it's taking to sort of develop more gas, but it's gas. It's not LNG per se. It's the cheapest form of gas it can find. And if that cheapest source of gas is domestic gas, then it will plough billions of dollars into developing domestic gas. In addition, it's got imports, which can come from Turkmenistan, can come from Myanmar, can come from Russia. And then there's LNG as well. So it's got a very complex dynamic of how to sort of grow the economy, project accurately supply and demand, and then follow that through with cost minimization. And right now, it hasn't got it quite right. It is long of gas that it's committed to buy. But when you look at the size of their uncertainties, it's no surprise that they're going to go through supply-demand imbalances. But I think that they will absolutely try to develop their shale unconventional gas resources because it's a long-term national asset. But to the extent that that happens, will be bridged by LNG and other gas imports.
And remaining on the demand side, assuming in Japan, for instance, they import over 80 MTPA of gas, of LNG. They started already 2 nuclear reactors, and 2 units at Kansai are set up to start, I think, early this year as well. Closing the reactors created a vacuum of around 20-25 BCM. I'm thinking if Japan will restart a vast majority of their nuclear power plants, again, that demand will slow down. So is there a floor for the prices in Asia? Do we think there is a floor? So we talk about oil. We believe that it cannot go under $23. I don't know why, but this is what experts say. And experts are, if you fast forward 5 years, they're all wrong. Is there, let's say, for Asia, let's say $5 per million BTU, could that be a floor? Is there a floor for gas prices in Asia? What do you think?
I mean, I've got an answer.
Yeah, I think there is, but I think it's a long way from that yet, because I think there are producers out there whose, cost of production and shipping is still very low, especially for the Asia-Pacific region. I think some of the producers, their floor is actually a lot higher.
8, 9.
And their LNG will struggle to find a home. There are some markets. Europe possibly could be, the floor in Europe will be, I think, somewhat higher. But overall, I think a lot of the more expensive producers, shall we say, more expensive LNG, the floor with the higher floor, will struggle. Because there are other producers out there who can, it's the question of how low can you go? And I think some of them can go a lot lower than others. I think I talked earlier about the American shale gas, and there are embedded costs in getting it out the ground, transmitting it to the facilities, liquefying it, shipping it. You have costs embedded in that you just can't take out.
But if you can't sell at that cost anymore,
Absolutely.
if you're
So
Australia, if you're a Gorgon and your break-even cost is $9 per million BTU, for instance, and the market, there is so much gas, LNG, on the market.
Yeah, but hold on, Doral. I mean, if I may say, you've posed a question which is very easy to pose and very difficult to answer.
Absolutely.
Right? The fact is, when all that capital has been sunk in Gorgon, it's gone. The money's been sunk. So what do? Do you not run the plant, or do you run it even at variable cost economics?
Or you lose money for a period of time.
You create a massive cash flow. It's cash flow positive. And even like the Northwest Shelf plant has been cash flow positive all the time. Whether it's generated all the returns that the investors wanted is a different issue. But once that capital's been sunk, you run these plants at full capacity. Yeah. And that's why we're saying there's an oversupply, because we expect it all to be switched on and stay on. The only ones which are semi-interruptible are the US plants. Yeah, and they can be interrupted if the actual price in the market is below the variable cost of operating. Yeah. So we really expect all these LNG plants, once the capital's sunk, to operate. how low can the floor go? Because we said all the LNG is going to get absorbed, it can go to the lowest cost or the lowest price market, I guess, which is kind of setting a floor. And as you said, that could well be Europe.
But that's
But it's going to vary from
region,
year to
exactly.
year as to where that is,
And from
based
region
on
to region.
supply demand.
I think it's going to be fluid. It's going to be shifting.
Yeah.
And I think it's a buyer's market at the moment, and they will shift it. There will be dynamics over the next 5 to 10 years that will shift the beers. But like Pat says, the plants that are built or being built will continue to operate. Just how profitable they are, the returns on them will be questionable, but they will operate them, because what else are they going to do with them? They're not going to shut them down. They have reserves, they have assets that they want to monetize to some extent. And I find it hard to believe that somebody will step back and say, okay, shut the assets in, let's mothball the plant, and let's wait and see. That's to me,
never happened.
that's a hell of a
Never
gamble.
happened in the
I
LNG
believe
business.
that add to that, to my colleagues' comments, that we should take in consideration what will happen in Iran.
Yeah.
Iran are producing, with the development in China that will be self-sufficient on gas, at least onshore. Iran are producing right now 175 BCM per year for their own consumption.
But they also
They will-
consume every bit of it.
For the time being, because
For the time
they were not able to export. But now that the embargo is lifted, they will add by 2020 an additional 330 BCM. So by 2020, Iran will reach 500 BCM per year. They can export 130 BCM, much more than Qatar and Australia. So these volumes, again, will come to the market in addition to
By 2020?
by 2020.
I doubt that.
These are the plans, of course, and there is different criticize about the exact dates. Is it 2020? But as Phil might explain, and he explained to us, there are some of these materials have been already purchased and ready. But my message here is that there will be plenty of gas and LNG in the market. And definitely, the mechanism of pricing will change. But the consumer and the market will always look to the safer. There is a bunch of elements that the buyer and the consumer of the energy will do. A safe energy, less emission, reasonable price, and affordable. And the LNG will be representing most of these elements.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
but the price will be totally different. We see different margin, as my colleague just mentioned, and we are entering a new era.
Yes, and security of demand in the past, it was Australia, in terms of security of supply, so there are only a handful of countries. Now, the LNG purchase is much more secure than it used to be in the past. And do we see a scenario? The reason I doubt about Iran by 2020, not beyond that, but by 2020, is the fact that they currently import some LNG in order to export some LNG to Turkey, so they stay in balance. They import 9 MTPA per 9 MTPA. But to put together LNG plants, it takes a while. And I believe because 34 BCM they used to re-inject in the ground in order to keep the oil up, but they will have to choose between, are we going to pump more oil or are we going to pump more gas? What's it going to be? And to keep the oil up, to put so much gas in the ground, just to keep the field not getting depleted, is that a proper use of natural gas? So they have to take some tough decisions, and I don't think it's going to be easy. But what I wanted to ask in relation to Iran, thank you for bringing that up, do you see a possibility in the future, 10 years from now in the future, that Iran could export LNG to the GCC countries?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'll say that I think Iran currently flares a lot of gas. So there's 9 BCFD, I think, is currently flared. So there's an awfully big incentive there to say, what can we do better with this gas? And whether or not Iran develops its own liquefaction capacity and how quickly it does that, I don't think is as important as Iran saying, we want to start earning a lot of dollars for our gas.
Absolutely.
And they don't have to do it by having their own LNG plants. There's talks already that they could pipe gas to Oman and Oman is limited by feed gas supply. So the actual life, the productive life of the Oman LNG plant could be extended with Iranian gas as a feed. That's also possible in Abu Dhabi, by the way, the AdGas facilities. So Iran could start to have an influence. Whether it is 2020 or not, or plus or minus a year or two, it could start to have an influence just in sort of pipeline gas exports. It's made no bones the fact it wants to export more to Iraq, to Turkey, to Pakistan, and potentially to India as well. So it's going to have, in my opinion, progressively more and more influence on gas in the region as an exporter. And whether or not it imports to the regional markets is a moot point. But just to say, I do think there's potential for the Middle East to double its LNG imports, particularly if the prices are low. And it's down to us as an industry to make that as innovative as we can commercially to keep stimulating new LNG
And also
demand.
to articulate that gas is not the bad child in the room. So,
No.
As Pat said in a bit earlier, if gas displaces coal, is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
And oil.
And oil,
Anything that is
absolutely.
dirtier than gas, if it displaces that, we're doing something good. If we're backing up renewables, that's good. And if we're cost effective and we're innovative commercially, then we will get a market share.
And maybe one last question, open question for everyone here. We see these talks between China and Russia. Obviously, there is a big deal that was signed into law by President Putin in May last year for the power of Siberia, 61 BCM. Do we believe that Russia is looking for alternative markets to Europe? Because Europe will be very soon dependent. 80% of their gas will come from outside Europe. So very much dependent on imports of gas. Do we see geopolitical sort of games at play in that part of the world, in that triangle, Russia, Europe, and China?
In my point of view, that's a pure geopolitical game, because Europe demand on the gas has been quite stable, if not negative, some part. They have lots of alternatives, including renewable energy largely, and then clean coal as well. So Russia definitely are discussing with China is not because they have surplus or gas that will come into production, new fields. It's more about finding an alternative market and in the same time leveraging the geopolitical situation.
Because China certainly can absorb a bit more. At the moment, Russia gives 30% of the gas consumption into Europe comes from Russia. So it's 150 BCM, I believe, is the right number. That's a considerable amount. We still don't have questions from the audience, but I'd like to thank you.
Can I just say,
yes, absolutely.
I just think you've got to recognize that, first of all, Russia has tremendous gas resources. And they have a position, if you like, at the moment that they are not going to relinquish easily. In fact, they are, I think, committed to growing that, whether it be through pipelines or whether it be through LNG. It's a bit like the Iran situation. But Russia, I have no doubts that they will further develop their gas exporting capabilities. As I say, whether it's pipelines or LNG, their push forward on LNG is it's creditable, I think, in this present time, it's been run, if you like, by the government. You know, Putin has openly supported other producers of LNG outside of Gazprom, such as Novatek, and he's allowed exports by other entities rather than Gazprom for LNG. So it's all if you like, for me coming together, that it just tells me that Russia is not going to relinquish its position as far as a gas exporter is concerned. They are going to hold what they've got and possibly increase it.
One last question from the audience. Several gas projects in the region are being cancelled or postponed. Will this lead to a gas shortage in 5-7 years as a result? I personally don't see it. I think there is enough gas in the market, and this we're talking about small supplies.
Yeah, I think the postponement of FID on projects, it's not surprising given the situation with the markets at the moment. And I think what's coming into the market over the next 5 years or so is certainly, as we've explained, more than enough to cover the demand and going forward probably for the next 5-10 years. So it makes economical sense if you have projects that are not in the final development phase, then to postpone them. Why would you invest in something that you really don't know the outcome? Now you can postpone that investment decision 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, perhaps one very last thing that I'll say in response to your question is if we carry along the path that we think we're on now, then no, there won't be a problem with gas shortages in 5 to 7 years. But I've been in the energy industry for 35 years, and what I can tell you is that you always expect the unexpected. We didn't know that Fukushima would happen, which stimulated 15 million tons of demand very quickly. There have been force majeures in different countries for supply. So our business is populated by uncertainty. There could be a natural disaster somewhere that takes out liquefaction facilities and the whole market turns.
Absolutely.
There could be an environmental disaster somewhere, and again, the market responds. So we are totally dynamic here. And we're saying with the way that we see the world at the moment, we don't think that we're going to go into shortage, but you just have to be, ready for the unexpected.
The question is very interesting, and it's quite correct about the macro picture. But for example, in Africa, I see Guinea-Bissau have started their LNG last year. Mozambique, they did not stop their progress on developing gas and potentially doing their LNG, Mozambique LNG. In Egypt, such a decision is tricky when you have low oil price. In Egypt, for example, with the new discovery, maybe that's the right time for the Egyptian government to develop the reserves, because the cost of the development is at its lowest right now. So depending on the economics of your situation, so it's case by case, and we cannot have a common situation globally concerning the development. But I see it in Africa and in Egypt. They are developing more gas fields and potentially developing more LNG facilities.
Yeah, the comment that I would make in relation to Africa is that developing a gas field is quite segregated. So you look at Egypt; they have the right labor skill pool. They have infrastructure. In Mozambique and Tanzania, that is non-existent. In fact, a Gorgon type of project is 3 to 4 times the GDP of the country. So it's quite challenging when the reserves are there, and that's true. Yeah. If I can have from all of you maybe a 30 seconds closing statement on any topic related to gas and LNG that is close to your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my 30 seconds would be to say our industry has been going for 50 years. We don't intend to sort of stop it now. These are headwinds, they're difficult times. But when the industry has difficult times, if you look back, it innovates. And commercially, we've got to innovate. We've probably got to move down and accept more commoditization. But coming from that, there will be something positive, I think. And technically as well, we've got to really smash new supply costs because we just cannot support these high cost stacks anymore. So something good will come out of that too. So my 30 seconds is we will innovate and carry on.
Phil?
Yeah, I fully agree. I've been in the business, the LNG business, I don't wish to tell you how long, But I think every time it's been where there's been a lull, there's been innovation, there's been a reset, if you like, on costs, and it's managed to invigorate and the business has picked up again. I think that will happen again. I think there will be a shift in the costs to a lower cost execution. And I think despite my own pessimism, I think the markets will absorb and they will pick up. And at some point, I'm not a gambling man, so I'm not going to bet on it, but at some point there will be a pickup where the demand starts to come back towards the supply. And because you haven't had the commitment for the additional supply, it will overtake. And then everything will reverse and it will become a seller's market. So, that's all.
Since you are in Abu Dhabi and it's a renewable energy and sustainability week, I'm very optimistic and proud to say that the natural gas in general and the LNG will be the best friend of the renewable energy industry. They complete each other. When the sun stops shining and the wind stops blowing, natural gas is there to complete the business and the service. And I think both industry will emerge as the most reliable source of energy in the coming decade. And as engineer, I'm very proud about what the technology and the engineering have delivered to this industry to make it safe for everybody and to deliver better quality of life with less emission, affordable at a reasonable price.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.